Ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Chairperson, for drawing attention to what I think is very important, the relevance of the past for the present. And it's really there where my present assignment as Chairperson of Project MOSM, which is a Ministry of Culture initiative, is located. And what I thought I would do is run through really the present challenges of protecting, preserving, and keeping the past, and the way forward as I see it very briefly. I'd like to start with the Indian Constitution, not because it's a great document or because we are India-centric and the Chairperson has already warned us against this approach, but because the Indian Constitution has paintings made by Nandlal Bose, which draw from archaeology and history and cultural heritage, and in a way integrates culture, heritage, the study of the past in present policies, and the way in which present policies are to be structured. So I would argue that already at the time of independence, this approach of connecting the past with the present is very prominently located, as also an understanding or looking towards the seas and the oceans, as evident from these two ships that you see that are painted in the Indian Constitution. The one on the top is from the Harappan civilization, 3rd millennium BCE. It's an Indus River boat, which was found as on a seal. And the bottom one is from the Buddhist monument at Borobudur on Java, which is extraordinary and has extraordinary depictions of sailing vessels on it. The one at the bottom is Nandlal Bose's drawing in the Indian Constitution, and this is what you see on the monument itself. And this is just one of the 5 traditional watercraft depicted at Borobudur. A replica of this was made in 2003-04 and sailed from Jakarta to Madagascar. So the point that I would like to make is that our founding fathers excuse me, certainly saw both the interaction between the past and the present in contemporary terms, and did draw our attention to maritime connections, maritime heritage, or travel across the seas. So what are then the challenges today and as we look forward? I'd like to quote from, or I'd like to draw your attention to issues that were discussed in 2014 at the 12th ASEAN-India Summit, which was held in Myanmar. And the 3 challenges that were talked about was how to address the so-called cultural loss in ASEAN countries. And we are really looking at the disappearance of heritage sites and monuments, largely as a result of urban expansion, ecological degradation, and overuse of the land. How to achieve an orchestrated preservation of cultural heritage, and how to protect cultural heritage as also indigenous peoples' rights. This was also again repeated in Delhi Dialogue 7, where the conclusion or the concluding session highlighted the role of the ocean for the coming decade, both for maritime security, but also because the history of the seas unite the ASEAN-India region. And I'd like to talk about it or see it, or our Project MOSM would like to discuss it as connected history across porous borders, linked through various traditions, boat building, community networks, and cultural practices. So how would one define maritime heritage? Very briefly, underwater archaeology all across ASEAN-India region, coastal structures and visual topography, as well as narratives relating to the sea. And I can go on and on talking about each of these, but we'll just put them on the table for discussion. So drawing on these traditions and drawing on the secondary literature available to us, what the Project MOSM does is looks at monsoon winds and the way in which monsoon winds united large parts of the ASEAN-India region. the monsoon winds are seen not merely as natural phenomenon, or not merely as environmental determinism, but much more as a conceptual category. And what we are looking at are traditional knowledge systems and cross-cultural interactions. A very brief overview of what the monsoon winds do, and the way in which these are really unique to the region, and provide predictability to voyages across the seas. There are several deities associated with the monsoons. Certainly Varun is one of them, and this slide shows a 10th century sculpture of Varun from Angkor in Siem Reap. So the point I'm making is that this is a connection that not only goes back several centuries and millennia, but is a connection which needs to be worked on, preserved, protected, if we are to take this forward, because large relics or remnants of these connections are disappearing at really alarming rate all across the region. The travelers across, the chairperson talked about trade, and certainly trading ventures, cargo carriers were major travelers across the region, but one is also looking at religious clergy, scholars, adventurers, musicians, and so on. Very briefly, just the Tamil coast, just one example, because certainly this is the start of the panel and I do not have time. Just focusing on the Tamil coast, there are several centers which bring together not just inscriptions, trade, but also religious architecture, shrines, which link across the ocean, and provide links to several countries, especially through Tamil inscriptions, which have been found from Myanmar, from Burma, Sumatra, Indonesia, and all the way up to China. Trade and trading voyages should really not be seen as a sort of single phenomenon, but incorporate donations to temples, crafts, traditions, writing, the references to scribes, and also links with foreign merchants. And this is just a slide that I put together to show the continuity from the 9th century temple, which you see on the left-hand slide, to the lighthouse, to the coming of the Europeans, and to the 19th century. So these links are varied, are diverse, have continued for a very long time, but have also transformed, and today are very different. And certainly, while one relooks at the past and while one examines the past, I think there is a greater need to integrate the past and cultural heritage into discussions of present connections, especially since many communities all across the region certainly trace their history, trace their beginnings to what was happening in a much earlier period. And I'm really indicating to the Tamil inscriptions which have been found from Burma to Sumatra, and all the way to China, as you see in this 13th century temple, which survives only in sculptures and only in parts. And still, there's lots that we do not know about this. We just have 300 stone carvings which have been found from the region, but there are several locations which are still to be traced and still to be talked about. So how do I see the way forward? And how do I see this as a partnership between the ASEAN region and India? In my point of view, certainly research, addressing several historical issues which remain under-discussed, under-researched, is one of the targets. The two others are tracing cultural roots. We do talk about the past, we do talk about connections, but I think in historical terms, there is much more to be done. But I think the primary focus then is on how do we preserve what is still available to us, and how do we take this forward in terms of management of our cultural heritage, especially given the fact that cities are expanding fast and are almost overrunning the cultural heritage. Thank you very much.